So I've said a few times in this podcast that Taiwan will sort of be the political moment of my generation. Much
Mhm.
for my parents' generation, maybe it was the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example. So whether it's a China aggression or a Taiwan liberation, I think Taiwan will really be the political moment of my generation. So how much am I wrong with that preamble to assert that China are the pests of the world?
The pests, did you say?
Yeah, the pests.
Ooh. And what in the, oh, this is a problem. What what do we do? Yeah, do we stand back
Uh-huh.
or do we defend them? I I'm fascinated to see if we, the Brits, put their new aircraft carrier through the South China Sea this year, because the Americans might like them to. I mean, what's it for? Um, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, and I think that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, just seismic.
Mm.
One of the defining moments of the previous century. If China was to take Taiwan back militarily, oh, it would be a bloodbath on
Mm.
both sides. I mean, we kind of, you kind of think, oh, little Taiwan, and it is compared to the gigantic China. But when you look at their firepower,
Mm.
Taiwan's firepower, especially its defensive firepower, oh my God, it's incredible. It would be a bloodbath for the
Mm.
Chinese to take it. I'm not saying they wouldn't. They've probably got a lot of people that they think are expendable. We've
Yeah.
all done that in our past histories. We did
But
it too.
also the
That's another story.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
But there's also that implication as well, if though it'd be a bloodbath between the Taiwanese and the Chinese, but it would almost trigger a Western
Well,
reinforcement, would it not?
yes, the current arrangement is that if it's an aggression by China, um, first of all, Taiwan mustn't declare full independence. That's the agreement they have with America. Unless they declare full independence, America will come to Taiwan's aid if there is an attack.
Okay.
If Taiwan declares independence, and China attacks, America, if it chooses, can say,
Wow.
no.
That's so interesting how that would
So
be
it's one of the
drawn
things
up
that
at the
stops them.
negotiation table. It's like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
America trying to
stops them
hedge their
from
bets.
doing
Like,
it.
we really don't want a war, so these are the terms.
But China clearly, its military stance is that it is positioning itself at some point to be able to do it.
Mm.
Being able to do it and doing it are two different things. But they're clearly positioning their military to be able to do it. And you look at their amphibious assault, the amount of money they put into amphibious assault training, etc. And they're getting aircraft carrier. Well, they've got 1.5, 2 aircraft carrier groups now. So I mean, they will not give up their dream. They intend to get Taiwan back this century.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that they will, but a big part of this is the attitude of the Quad countries, especially the Americans. And at the moment, the Americans are minded to stand by Taiwan. It's not just because of Taiwan, with which they have an excellent relationship. It's to do more as well with keeping the international sea lanes open, pushing back against the Chinese pushing out. It's very worth looking. There's a map that you can get that looks at the world looking westward from China's perspective, as if you're standing on the Chinese coast looking that way
Okay.
out. And what you see in front of you, if you're Chinese, is a wall, which their 9-line dash, they call it. And it's Japan, and it's Taiwan, and it's the Philippines. And they see a wall in front of them, all of which are American allies.
Mm-hmm.
And to really control the region, they need to get past that wall. And Taiwan is part of that. And if you give up that, you've just opened up a huge brick in that wall. So it's not just about standing by our plucky little friends from Taiwan. It's about that bigger picture of not blinking and not allowing China to say, this is our area, not yours. So America at the moment is not going to change its stance of keeping the international sea lanes open, if necessary, by force. China is not going to give up its dream of pushing the Americans away and taking Taiwan. And yes, in your lifetime, the crunch will come. And if neither side blinks, the wall will come.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a compromise, both sides will try and reach it.
I suppose optimistically for Taiwan, you perhaps I don't know what's the right way to say this. You're bittersweet in what the coronavirus has sort of done to China's relationship with the world, because it has, in my estimation, sort of weakened their soft power, definitely, but even also maybe their actual power, and the Western narrative really changing from China is just a country that's trying to do the best for their people and raise them out of poverty. How amazing is that? Sure, maybe they've got these weird customs, but that's okay. So be it. We have our weird customs too. To now, it's like, wait a minute, they're pretty imperialistic, and if they had no consequences facing them, they might do some terrible things. That's just my estimation of how the narrative has sort of shifted.
Well, I agree with everything you said up until imperialistic. Although, that's a difficult word, because what does it mean in the 21st century? Does it mean you go and grab a piece of land and take it in Africa? No, it has changed, hasn't it? The idea of imperialism. Well, let's come back to that in a minute. No, you're absolutely right. I thought China played it quite well for the first month or so, when their lies that they were telling, we believed it. And they did give the genome sequencing. They handed that over very quickly, which thank God they did, otherwise we might not even have some of these vaccines. I don't know. Excuse me. But then it became apparent over the following 6, 7, 8 months, A, that they'd been lying through their teeth, B, that they were covering it up, C, that all this soft power kit they were giving to like Italy and places. The EU was absolutely in disarray. The Italians were begging Brussels to enact, to trigger a law that they have. And Brussels refused. And so Italy didn't get any help for months. And so China said, we'll help you. And it was a great bit of soft power until all the kit they sent didn't work. Same with the kit they sent to the Brits.
Is that a fact? I didn't see that. I thought they were just like...
look, some of it did, and some of it was done perhaps for genuine altruistic reasons, but a lot of it was simply soft power. And then if you're going to do soft power, get it right. They didn't. They got it wrong, because half the kit didn't work. And so a lot of people said, And then across the year, you saw them also using the COVID crisis as cover. The incident with India, where dozens of Indian troops were killed. In fact, quite a few Chinese troops were killed in hand-to-hand fighting, which you kind of think is guns and bayonets. No, it was fists and clubs on the border. Dozens died on each side in a mass brawl. But this is because the Chinese had moved across the demarcation line, but they were using, the world's attention was elsewhere. They sank a fishing vessel, I think it was, it doesn't really matter, except to the people on it. But they sank that. They sailed a carrier group right around Taiwan. I think it was the first. They did a whole bunch of stuff. Knowing that everyone else was busy. And then there was the sanctions against Australia for daring to say that the Chinese had done X, Y, and Z with COVID. And then suddenly you get I think it was the barley, the wheat, all these sanctions piled in on Australia. And what happened across the globe is that people started to pay more attention to China and what it's doing and its soft power. And there's been a flurry of stories over here in the past 6 months about their inroads into our universities. Huawei, the 5G phone company, initially we said we would accept them, and now we've reversed it. And that's
okay, nice.
So a whole bunch of stuff in the past 6 months. A lot of people have woken up to how China is trying to dominate the world. I'm not blaming the Chinese for it. Every great power tries to dominate the world, which brings us briefly back to imperialism. They are not an imperialistic country the way that the Brits were, or indeed the Japanese. They don't intend to occupy.
You don't think so?
Places and say we are the sovereign power here now, or at least the protecting power. But yeah, they are absolutely, when it comes to places like Africa, moving into African countries, dominating it commercially, bringing in thousands of their own workers instead of employing local people, putting in what they say are volunteers, but are in fact Chinese police officers, as security guards. It's a form of imperialism. And then a subject I know you know something about, which is the debt diplomacy. You know, I mean, Sri Lankan port is the best example. Yes, certainly we will lend you all this money to build the port, and knowing full well you can't pay it back. And when you can't pay it back,
Oh,
nice
so
port
it's
will
ours.
have it.
Yeah.
You know, they're doing it. It's not, you know, they're doing it. Look, the Brits did things like that as well. I'm not saying they're inherently evil or anything, but they are behaving in this manner.
What makes it evil, right? Or just what separates it from maybe the way people think about how the Brits did it, or the French, or even the Americans in Latin America? Like I think what separates it is the fact that we have a bit of an insight into the Chinese culture. Matthew Tai runs this fantastic YouTube channel, and he's an American who lived in China for a very long time and sort of got chased out of there a while ago. But he has Matthew Tai, Tye, last name.
Oh, yes, I have heard of him.
Yeah, he should be coming on the podcast soon, so it'll be good to talk to him about exclusively this. But it's like a look into China's culture, right? The sort of decimation of the actual ethnic minorities that live in the country, and the actual microcultures that live in the country. The fact that education is, I mean, it's a completely authoritarian state, right? China thinks of people as Chinese or foreign. Right? You know, you could be Vietnamese and walk into China, and Australian and walk into China, but we're both foreigners. There is a racism to that, because there is also the China is a superior culture narrative. And so anyway, that's a bit of preamble to say that because we sort of know these things about China, there is a different paint with which these debt trap diplomacies are brushed. For example, in Africa, if the United States was financing the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, I'd feel very differently about it than the fact that the Chinese are financing it, as at one example. What do you make of that?
I find it problematic, to use the modern word, because I know where you're coming from. China is not doing what it's doing around the world for everyone else's benefit. Far from it. But it is behaving in a way that we used to behave, perhaps some elements of it we still do. You know, but British imperialism had incredibly dark moments. You know, the massacre at Amritsar, well, basically taking other people's territory and getting all their riches for decades. You know, so I hesitate to think that we were better in our imperial phase than China. I mean, there was the probably racist element of the civilizing effect, and there are some good end results of building railway networks and things, and education, but it's a very hard argument to make about the positive side of it. So I don't think that we were necessarily any better than China.
Sure.
I think what we have done in the past few decades is learned more about our behaviors and our crimes. And I think we would be hard pushed to repeat them, even if we could. I don't think we would try to do that, because I don't think we have quite the same attitudes anymore to different peoples. We've come a long way, not far enough. And I doubt China. China hasn't been on that journey.
Sure.
There is a very, very strong strain of Chinese nationalism. Well, I should say Han nationalism, because there are many different Chinese. You know, there's Mongolian Chinese, and Tibetan Chinese, and the Uyghurs Chinese. But the Han, ethnically, is an exceptionally strong strain of nationalism within the Han, and it shows when they go to African countries and elsewhere, and they do their economic deals, and they are not interested in workers' rights, and they're not interested in saying to the government, great, we'd love to do business with you, but we do have an issue with what's happening with these political prisoners or whatever. And
Right.
Western foreign policy, for all its hypocrisy and its problems, does actually try to at least do some good as it moves
and
around
net
the
good.
world. And that just is not part of the Communist Party and the Chinese way of thinking at all. I'm not painting us as saints, but I think it is justifiable to try to tie international trade with human rights, and that is just simply not on their radar.
I think a good example of an infrastructure project that they're involved in that might highlight this the best is now it hasn't been built, but the Chinese Nicaraguan canal, which I read about in your book, I believe. So this is objectively a atrocious thing to do to the environment. You just cut a half pipe through some of the thickest jungle in the world, right? It's connect a hot and a cold ocean into a freshwater lake. It's disaster on every single level, and but there's economic upside for doing it, right? So if we look at it through the British lens or the Chinese lens, which I don't think we necessarily have to, but just if you did for the sake of argument, we'd look at that and say if it was a British private firm behind it, people would be like, wait a minute, is the economic upside worth the catastrophic environmental damage you're going to do there? And you would literally chop the country in half. What about all the what about all the displacement?
There would be a consideration, but up to a point, my lad. Our companies are also, British Petroleum, for all the greening that it's doing, is still also doing all sorts of things. And the French are in Niger because they need the uranium, the green yellowcake, to keep the lights on in France. And the working conditions in Niger are absolutely appalling. I think the bigger difference is that if a British company was doing something like that, let's say that the canal project, which as you say is probably not going to go ahead now, they've got a few hundred meters in each side, and we got to hear about it, our environmental movements, which are growing, would be up in arms about it, and the moral pressure would translate into political pressure on the government and on the companies. In China, forget it. They just don't have that because it's closed society. So, it's delicate, isn't it? We're both treading slightly on dangerous ground because it's very easy to talk about these things as if we're all, in the 21st century, brilliant, wonderful.
Like we understand the complexity.
We're not, but I do think we have different standards.